Discovering Alabama is a production of the Alabama Museum of Natural History.
See any bears yet? You keep your eyes out. This lovely stream is Bear Creek. So Turkey here is keeping alert for bears. And as the name maybe suggests, the area is pretty wild.
Since prehistoric days, this area of northwest Alabama has been wild and remote. Remote, yet not exactly isolated from changes brought about by human hands.
Hi, I'm Doug Phillips. Join me for a float down Bear Creek. Along the way, we'll stop and consider the surrounding watershed, and we'll hear about an inspiring story of people coming together to resurrect their beloved stream, setting an example for the rest of the state, for the rest of the nation.
This program is about a land unknown to many people, a land that in many ways has maintained its native natural wonders. A place of bountiful backcountry, forests, streams, and wildlife more diverse than can be found in much of the inhabited world. Come along with me as we explore the wild wonders of this land. Come along as we discover Alabama.
Welcome to Discovering Alabama, and welcome to Bear Creek. Now, there are several Bear Creeks in the state, but this Bear Creek is in a splendid natural setting in northwest Alabama.
Bear Creek lies north of the Tennessee Divide, which separates the Tennessee Valley from the Mobile River Basin. Bear Creek, therefore, flows into the Tennessee River. The folks who live in this neck of the woods will tell you that the beauty of the area alone is enough to make it special. But there's more to the story.
The story of Bear Creek is today reaching across the nation. It's a tale of what can be accomplished when people set their hearts and minds to protecting their natural heritage. And what a heritage it is.
In this rural corner of Alabama, three physiographic provinces come together: the Highland Rim, the Cumberland Plateau, and, amazingly enough, the East Gulf coastal plain reaches way up here also. This confluence of physiography, along with a diversity of geology, and some dramatic drops in elevation, add up to a land of fascinating scenery that has attracted attention since long before recorded history.
Beyond the beauty, beyond the nature, The story of Bear Creek includes quite an intriguing human history.
Artifacts discovered in the region tell us of early human habitation dating back at least 12,000 years. The evidence indicates that by the time of Columbus, around 500 years ago, the native peoples inhabited villages and farms. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, new settlers of European descent were pushing into this territory and coming face to face with previous settlers of native descent, Chickasaw and Cherokee Indians. By the time Alabama became a state in 1819, the Indians had ceded these lands to the United States, and more newcomers flowed into Alabama from the north via the Tennessee River and from the south via the Alabama and the Tombigbee. The folks settling in the Bear Creek area were primarily subsistence farmers, making their own way in sharp contrast to the plantation owners to the north of the Tennessee River and to the south in Alabama's Black Belt. For many, the 19th century ways of living off the land continued in the region until the mid-20th century.
When I was growing up, we farmed with mules and horses, and went from that to the tractors. And I can remember when we first got electricity in 1948, so we've come a long way.
We got electricity when I was in 11th grade, and my dad had already bought a radio and a refrigerator and several things, but normally on Saturday night we coon hunt all night. And I don't remember exactly what I'd done, but I remember debating within myself what did I want to do. Stay home and listen to the Grand Ole Opry go coon hunting that Saturday night, because they turned the power on Friday night.
Lights up north, south, east, west. Well over 500,000 farms, schools, churches, stores, and rural industrial plants getting electric service for the first time. 300,000 more expected to come on these lines, and new lines going up almost everywhere at the rate of 500 miles a day.
TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, brought electricity to the area, and more than that, brought the outside world into these isolated hills and valleys. Today, agriculture continues to be an economic force, but this is not the subsistence farming of a bygone era. While many local farms are still family-owned and operated, today farming can be a complicated business, often involving more contact with paperwork than with the land. So when folks want to get back to nature, as they say, it's often in the form of outdoor recreation.
Fishing in this county has always been great, and throughout this entire watershed, even before the impoundment of all the reservoirs. I walked and fished up and down these streams.
The entire Bear Creek watershed is home to a number of species that once were near extinction and have been success stories for resource departments. Wood duck, white-tailed deer, wild turkey, a number of species, river otter, all of which at one point in our past were nearly extinct, and they are commonly found here now.
Paddlers across the southeast and beyond know Bear Creek as one of Alabama's most challenging floats. And float may be something of an understatement, with Class 1, 2, and 3 rapids. Factory Falls, in fact, is a rare Class 6 rapid and is much too dangerous to attempt. While Bear Creek's reputation as a paddler's paradise, as a sportsman's paradise, spreads far and wide, there's another aspect to the story that has attracted national attention too.
With such natural appeal and with such history, it's hard to believe that this stream was ever anything but the marvel it is today. But there is a dark side to the story.
The sparkling waters that flow so clean and clear in Bear Creek today were once plagued by serious pollution. In fact, beginning in 1984, Bear Creek had to be closed to human contact. And for many years thereafter, this jewel of northwest Alabama wasted away.
A lot of people used the floatway, not just locally, but even out of state came in to make use of the floatway. And after it was opened, a few years through water sampling, TVA discovered that there was high amounts of fecal coliform bacteria in the floatway.
Routine testing of the waters by TVA revealed unsafe levels of bacteria, and Bear Creek was closed. But where was this bacteria coming from?
The problem is officially referred to as non-point source pollution, sort of a bureaucratic term that's best understood by first understanding what we mean by the term watershed.
A watershed would include the lake, the river, the reservoir, and any of the land from which its waters originate. In the case of the Bear Creek watershed, we work with 790-something square miles.
From up here in this high point in Franklin County, we can get a better sense of the scope of the Bear Creek watershed. In one direction are the reaches of Colbert County, in another Lawrence County, and yet another Marion County.
In addition, a portion of the watershed crosses the Winston County line to the southeast, and to the west, the watershed crosses the Mississippi state line.
And all of these counties have to work together for the good of the Bear Creek watershed. Two of those counties, Etowamba and Tishomingo, are in Mississippi, so we have to work across state boundaries as well as county boundaries.
Essentially, the watershed is the land that sheds the water. Thus, the conditions in the land are a major and direct influence of the conditions in the streams and waters.
Just because one county is doing the right thing, if another county upstream of you is not, then you have to form a partnership and get on the same page with them as far as working together for watersheds.
Understanding this big picture of the watershed is crucial to understanding the concept of non-point source pollution. You see, there are two basic kinds of water pollution, and the first is point source.
Or, put simply, something like a flume or a pipe. In fact, point source pollution is often referred to as pollution at the pipe.
So, point source pollution, as the name says, comes from a specific point. In fact, you can usually point to it. Non-point source pollution, on the other hand, well, its origins are usually more dispersed.
In other words, it can be anywhere and everywhere. Non-point source pollution is a term that has come to be associated with the rapid urbanization of our modern world. But urbanization could not be blamed for the non-point source pollution wreaking havoc in the rural areas of the Bear Creek watershed. What then was the problem?
We announced a meeting inviting all interested landowners within the watershed to come and to hear why the creek was closed, how the pollution came about, and what our goal was as a committee to do to clean the water back to a level that we could reopen the floatway.
We got a card from addressed to all the local farmers to meet at the college, and we was aiming to have a meeting to see what we'd do about the Bear Creek. Well, I went up there with the intentions of really doing what I could to really prosecute this old guy up in Huntsville or everywhere it was, the upper end of this thing. It had polluted this thing and messed it up where we couldn't enjoy it like I've always enjoyed all my life. But I got up there and found out I was the one that doing the polluting. So that changed the story a whole lot. I didn't know.
It turned out that some of the very people who loved the area the most, the local farmers, were the source of much of the non-point source pollution in Bear Creek. So now what?
Because non-point source problems are attributable to conditions that can occur across the watershed, fixing these problems requires cooperation across the watershed.
A partnership was developed between TVA, local agencies, landowners, agencies such as the Natural Resources Conservation Service, the ASCS office, different landowners, Extension Service, formed a local partnership. Our goal then was to convince the landowners and educate them to the point that some of their own operations were contributing problems within the watershed.
We just farmers, we out here to make a living. We're not out here to harm the environment. We're not out here to cause no bad smell or pollute the water. Because we live here, we drink the same water the people in town drink, and we go canoeing in the same lake everybody else goes in, or fishing in the same lake, and we'd like to see it kept clean too.
Local farmers could hardly be tagged for all the problems facing Bear Creek. A local school had problems with its septic system. Several towns within the watershed had waste disposal issues as well. But rather than looking for someone to blame, landowners across the watershed took a real golden rule approach to fixing the Bear Creek pollution problem.
I think the biggest thing that I've carried away with this that's impressed me is the fact that the local sponsors and the landowners in the watershed, those stakeholders that had something in play there, all came to the table without pointing fingers at each other and embraced the fact that we're all part of the problem, but we're also all part of the solution.
I think that's one of the things that we all should try to realize, that somebody lives downstream from us, and we need to be conscious of the things we do.
The local folks implemented a number of best management practices, or BMPs, that contributed to the resurrection of Bear Creek. Practices such as no-till farming, streamside buffer zones, and a variety of animal waste management systems. Landowners' willingness to work for solutions was complemented with support from and cooperation among the many governmental agencies.
I think my highlight in working with the people in the Bear Creek watershed was the fact that they cared enough, wanted to do the right things to improve water quality through a voluntary system. We were able to forego any type of regulation for this project to be successful.
The Bear Creek Watershed Project, as it is now known, continues to receive support.
As part of the '87 amendment to the Clean Water Act, Section 319 of the Act established a requirement for states to develop a non-point source management program. Section 319 also included an authorization for Congress to provide money to EPA and then the states to operate those programs, and a percentage of that money gets passed through to local stakeholders and sponsor organizations to provide for educational and outreach efforts, best management practices demonstrations, coordination of watershed efforts, and overall water quality related efforts within those target watersheds.
The remarkable Bear Creek Watershed Partnership has produced equally remarkable results.
The good news: in 1990, Bear Creek became one of the first streams in America to be reopened after having been closed to human contact. Today, Bear Creek has reclaimed its position as one of Alabama's most challenging canoe and kayak runs. Lakes throughout the watershed are developing reputations of their own.
The Bear Creek watershed consists of 4 primary water bodies, the first of which would be Cedar, then Little Bear, Big Bear, and Upper Bear.
Of course, land was acquired behind just the lake boundary itself, so we could influence the management of the land around it, whereas it wouldn't be all held by private individuals. It would be held by the public, by us and by TVA. That increases opportunity for people to go hunting, fishing, hiking, birding, or any other nature activity there.
The folks of the Bear Creek watershed have shown the nation what good cooperation can bring to environmental quality. Now they are expanding that cooperation into an area that is every bit as critical to our future: environmental education.
And we feel that education is the key to our success in the future in Bear Creek.
Here's a new species we didn't get last time. This is the male. See how brightly they get colored up?
We want the kids to learn something. We want them to have fun. We want to really make sure that they understand the connection between everything that happens on the land affects the water.
He lives free on the rocks and stuff like that.
and he grazes. He's a grazer.
Now, when they leave here, I hope they take part of this with them and educate their children. I think once we get these kids doing the right things, that later on their children will be doing the right things. It's not something that's going to change overnight. It's going to take time.
Clean, fresh water is fundamental to life itself, a basic lesson of any grade school science class. But our rivers are also fundamental aspects of our history and heritage, to be appreciated and enjoyed. Here in this glorious part of Alabama, progress in education and progress in environmental protection are occurring none too soon because, once again, change is brewing.
Seems weird that you spend all the money educating the kids and raising them in the area and teaching them and showing them everything about the area, and then when they go to work, they have to move to Birmingham or Atlanta, wherever to get a job, and a lot of that history that you pass down to your kids gets gone.
Probably the most scary thing in facing the future on the lakes is, other than the unknown, you know, we are wanting industry, but at what cost? You know, what's going to be the trade-off? When you get more industry and maybe more jobs and more opportunities in the area, that's going to bring in maybe more people, and maybe with more people comes more development and more strain placed on what limited resources you have.
It's a dilemma faced throughout rural Alabama, throughout the rural South, a dilemma best expressed as a question. Do we have to invite the world into our special places in order to preserve our special places?
This area is relatively undeveloped compared to an area like Birmingham and the Cahaba River. We don't want to prohibit growth in the area, but we want to do it in such a way that our natural resources are minimally impacted.
Here in the Bear Creek watershed, we find a beauty that residents have fought to preserve. Here we find an example of achieving that delicate balance between human needs and the needs of nature.
Bear Creek is a testimonial, living proof that a stream, though influenced by the human hand, can retain, indeed revive, its native appeal and natural values.
You're still out in the rural. You have your own privacy. You can get up in the morning and go out and watch the deer playing in the yard or ducks. Being able to go out and fish in the lakes and not have to fight a bunch of people to get to where you want to fish. The people are friendly. Some of the best folks I've ever been around.
I think if God hadn't wanted us to have it, He wouldn't have created it for us. I think the world is a creation by God, and it's supposed to be kept like He would want us to keep it.
I think one of the most important lessons that we can learn from people that are involved in the Bear Creek watershed or any of the other watershed projects is the simple issue that not only are we part of the problem, but we're all potentially part of the solution, and that those changes or benefits to water quality that need to occur have to occur at the local level. They won't happen in Montgomery. They won't happen at the Capitol or the State House. They're going to happen there in the watershed where the problems exist.
Seen any bears yet? Bear Creek and the Bear Creek watershed, a special part of Alabama. And I guess you could say the people up here are special too. They've accomplished something here that every Alabamian can be proud of.
This program is supported by grants from the Solon and Martha Dixon Foundation, the Alabama Wildlife Federation, working for wildlife since 1935, Legacy, Partners in Environmental Education, and the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources.